The shot came from the tree line, tight, deliberate, silenced, and shattered the windshield 2 inches above the old man's face without giving him time to blink. He didn't scream, didn't duck, didn't flinch, just hit the brakes and felt the truck skid sideways across the gravel like it was trying to tear itself in half. Another shot tore through the mirror, then silence, then the slow hiss of steam rising from the hood as the engine coughed and died in the middle of nowhere. He opened the door with one hand and pulled the revolver with the other, eyes already scanning the trees like he'd done before, long ago, when the jungle was wet and full of ghosts. But this wasn't Vietnam, and these weren't strangers in a foreign land. This time, someone wanted him dead right here in Montana. He ducked behind the truck, back against cold steel, heart pounding not from fear but from something worse, recognition, and whispered, "They found me." A rustle came from the brush behind him, too heavy to be wind, too careful to be an animal, and for a second he thought, this is it, this is how they clean up unfinished business. But what stepped out wasn't a man with a weapon, it was a dog, limping, ribs showing, blood dried on one ear, and eyes locked on his like it already knew his name. The dog didn't bark, didn't beg, didn't move closer, just stood there staring at him, breathing slow, like it had been following him for miles. And in that moment, he felt something in his chest shift, not pain, not fear, but a memory trying to crawl back to the surface. The man lowered his weapon, just slightly, enough to speak without shaking, and said, "Who sent you, boy?" Half a joke, half the truth, because something about that dog wasn't right. That's when he saw it, tied around the dog's neck with a piece of bootlace, an old photograph, scorched around the edges, showing 3 men standing in front of a burning mill. He snatched it off, breath-catching, because one of the men was himself, 25 years younger, holding a shovel, and looking like someone who had just buried a secret too big for one grave. The others in the photo, one was Clay Darrow, long thought dead, and the third, was the sheriff who'd sworn he died in that fire. And that was when it hit him, not just the memory, not just the fear, but the truth. Someone was sending a message, and this dog was the messenger. He didn't know yet how many people would bleed before the truth came out. He didn't know yet that the man he thought he buried would walk back into his life before this was over. He didn't know yet that his most trusted friend had betrayed him from the beginning, hiding behind a badge and a smile. He didn't know yet that the girl who would help him uncover it all had blood ties deeper than bullets and older than his sins. But all of it, every damn piece of it, started right here, on that dirt road, with a bleeding dog in a photograph that wasn't supposed to exist. And if you think that's the end of it, you're not even close. It's not just a warning, the voice said from behind him, and the old man turned fast, gun raised, heart already 3 beats late. Standing at the edge of the clearing, with the morning sun cutting his face into lines of shadow and fire, was a man in a weathered tan hat and a deputy's badge that hadn't caught the light in years. His boots were muddy, his hands empty, but his eyes were calm, the kind of calm you only see in someone who's already decided who's going to die that day. Max growled deep, moving closer to the man's side, his stance guarded but not aggressive, like he recognized something inside this stranger's smell that wasn't quite stranger at all. The old man didn't lower his weapon, not even as the man raised both hands slowly and said, "That dog didn't find you by accident." "You remember me?" he asked, voice rough like gravel dragged across memory, and the old man blinked hard because something about that voice clawed at the edge of recognition. "I worked your fence line in '97, the man said. "And I was there the day they pulled that body out the mill fire. You said it was Clay Darrow." The air thickened then, like the woods were listening now, and the old man replied, slow and careful, "I remember the badge. I don't remember the face." "That's 'cause I was meant to disappear after that," the man said. "But I didn't. And I didn't come here for you, I came for the dog." Max stopped growling, just stood there between them, breathing steady, eyes locked on the man like he already knew where this was going. "They left something on him," the man continued, crouching to one knee, never breaking eye contact with the old man, who still hadn't lowered his pistol. "A message, sure," he added, "but also something older, something that was never supposed to come back above ground again." He pulled from his coat a sealed envelope, old and oil-stained, and placed it on the stump between them like an offering you'd only lay at a grave. The old man reached forward, slow and silent, opened the flap, and out fell a photo he hadn't seen in 34 years, a boy with blood on his shirt and Clay Darrow's eyes. Before he could speak, the man said, "There's a girl now. And she's carrying the last piece of what they buried with your friend." Then came the sound, sharp and unnatural, the distant whine of tires skidding across gravel too fast to be local. The man rose, calm again, eyes narrowing, and said, "We got 3 minutes before they make this a cleanup job instead of a message." Max shifted again, low to the ground, his muscles coiled tight like rope pulled to snapping point, waiting for something worse than danger, certainty. The old man pointed at the envelope, voice low, "Who's chasing her?" The deputy didn't blink, didn't hesitate, just whispered 2 words that made the blood drop in temperature, "The sheriff." The scream ripped through the trees so fast and sharp it didn't sound human, closer to something torn in two by panic and steel. Max took off first, leaping over the creek bed like a streak of muscle and purpose, the old man running after him with a breath caught halfway between fear and fury. Branches whipped his arms, stones slid beneath his boots, and that scream kept echoing somewhere ahead, too close for comfort and far too close for hope. They broke through the clearing just as the truck peeled away, tires throwing dirt in wide, desperate arcs, and in the back seat, a girl, bound and blindfolded, banging on the window with her forehead. The old man raised the rifle, took a shot, then another, and watched as the rear window exploded in a rain of safety glass, but the truck didn't stop, didn't slow, didn't even swerve. He dropped to his knees, chest heaving, watching taillights vanish into the pines like the truth had just been stolen out of the world once again. Max stood beside him, tail rigid, hackles raised, growling not in anger this time, but in helplessness, in confusion, like he understood they had failed. The deputy stumbled out from behind a ridge a few seconds later, blood trailing from a gash over his temple, eyes wide with shame and breathless guilt. They were faster, he rasped, wiping blood from his cheek with a sleeve, and they weren't supposed to know we were coming, someone told them. The old man looked at him hard, voice shaking in his throat like a rope pulled too tight. "Who the hell is she, and why is she worth dying for?" The deputy didn't answer right away, just pulled a folded file from his coat, edges burned, seal half melted, and handed it over without saying another word. Inside were 3 documents, birth certificate, military field log, and an adoption form with every name blacked out except one handwritten in faded pencil, Clara. "Born under a different name," he said, eyes distant, voice hollow. "Raised by people who thought they were protecting her, not hiding her, but they were doing both." John stared down at the pages, reading the dates, the hospital stamp, the signature at the bottom, then stopped cold when he saw a line that nearly knocked the breath out of him. Father, deceased. Mother, classified. Guardian signature, Sheriff William Carrington. It took several seconds before the silence between the 3 of them began to thicken into something uglier than confusion, something closer to betrayal in its purest, coldest form. The old man whispered, not asking but confirming, "He raised her." The deputy looked away, unable to meet his eyes, and said, "He raised her like a daughter, but she's not his blood, and she sure as hell ain't his to keep." The old man closed the file, tucked it into his coat, and stood slow like someone who knew a fight wasn't coming, it had already arrived. "She's the link, isn't she?" he said. "The reason Clay vanished, the reason the mill burned, the reason that dog showed up on my road." The deputy gave one slow nod, then said what neither of them wanted to hear, "And now she's the only thing keeping the sheriff's house of cards from collapsing." Max barked once, sharp, loud, urgent, and turned toward the west ridge like he'd caught a scent that had no place this close to dusk. They all heard it a second later, the slow, grinding purr of an idling engine, too quiet to be local, too steady to be legal. The deputy raised his rifle, eyes narrowing, and said, "He's not running, he's waiting." The old man loaded a shell, chambered it slow, and asked, "And what's he waiting for?" The deputy looked him straight in the eye, no more hesitation, no more masks, and said, "For you." The bullet didn't miss, it wasn't meant to, it shattered the tree trunk a foot from the old man's head and sent bark flying like shrapnel. Max darted left into cover without waiting for command, and the old man rolled to the ground behind a fallen log, rifle gripped tight, breath held like a prayer with no church left to say it in. The second shot hit the dirt where he'd been kneeling just seconds before, and by the time he turned to return fire, the engine had already stopped humming. From the trees above the ridge came a voice, calm, low, the kind of voice that didn't yell because it never needed to. "You don't need to die today, John." The sound of his name wrapped in that voice hit harder than the gunshots, because it belonged to the one man he'd trusted through every storm, every war, every lie. "Sheriff," the old man said, rising slow, barrel level, heart colder than the steel in his hands, "you always this generous with folks you shoot at?" There was laughter then, brief and bitter, followed by boots on gravel, 3 men stepping out from the trees in staggered formation, all dressed in black, but only one of them unarmed. The sheriff wore his old service coat like a memory he hadn't quite earned, and his face hadn't changed, not even the corners of his mouth where the truth used to live. "I'm only gonna say this once," the sheriff said, voice smooth like whiskey that burns twice, once going down, and once when the memory comes back. "Give me the girl. Burn the file. And I'll leave you enough quiet to last whatever years you think you've got left." The old man didn't move, didn't blink, just shifted his stance and replied, "You brought a kill team for a conversation?" The sheriff smirked, took 2 slow steps forward, and said, "I brought insurance. You've got a reputation for making trouble harder than it needs to be." Max emerged from the other side, silent as snowfall, growling low with a look that said he'd die before he let that man touch anything that breathed right. The deputy stepped beside the old man, rifle raised, eyes locked not on the soldiers, but on his former boss, the man who used to call him son. And the sheriff, God help him, just smiled wider and said, "I raised better men than you. Too bad they turned out like this." The air broke then, like glass under a boot, as the old man fired first, 1 round into the chest of the lead gunman, the recoil shaking years loose from his bones. The second man dropped from the deputy's shot, and Max leapt into the third before the body had even hit the ground, jaws locking with the weight of judgment and memory. Only the sheriff remained, standing there, untouched, coat unbuttoned, face pale, eyes dark, hands still behind his back like this had been a test, not a fight. And with a voice that cut like a knife dipped in regret, he said, "I didn't come here to kill you, John, I came to offer you your son." The world froze then, rifles lowered, breath vanished, time slowed, and the old man whispered, "My son died in Fallujah 17 years ago." The sheriff reached into his coat, slow and careful, and pulled out a photograph, not fresh, not old, but recent enough to twist the knife deep. In it stood a man in fatigues, beard heavy, eyes blank, beside him a dog with a scar on its leg and a chain around its neck. The old man stared at the image, silence breaking every bone inside him as he realized Max wasn't the only soldier who had come back wrong. The sheriff said nothing more, just handed over the photo and turned to leave, calling over his shoulder, "There are things you don't understand, and truths you never asked to know." The old man clutched the photo, voice shaking as he called out after him, "Where is he?" "He's not dead," the deputy said, just as the old man dropped to his knees, holding the photograph like it had weight beyond paper. The wind shifted behind them, snapping through the trees in short bursts, but even that couldn't drown out the sound of that sentence unraveling everything the old man had accepted as truth. "I saw the body," the old man muttered, almost to himself, voice frayed like rope stretched past its purpose. "They flew him home in a flag, they gave me the casket." The deputy knelt beside him, voice quieter now, but full of something deeper than pity, something more dangerous, certainty. "That casket was empty, sir," he said slowly. "Or filled with something that wasn't your son." The words didn't hit like a slap, they landed like a grave being reopened by bare hands and too many unanswered prayers. Max stepped forward then, nuzzling his head into the old man's arm, not to comfort, but to remind, to anchor him to the moment that still needed him breathing. The deputy reached into his coat and unfolded a second document, older than the others, creased and yellowed with time, but signed by a name the old man hadn't spoken aloud in 30 years. Project Echo Sentinel, he read, handing over the sheet. A program buried under 6 layers of defense contracts and one fake war that never made the news. The name beside the signature, above the words, Classified Asset Extraction, was Clay Darrow. The old man didn't speak, not at first, just stared at that name like it had crawled out of the fire with skin still peeling. "That's not possible," he finally whispered, shaking his head. "Clay died in that mill. I carried his badge. I burned what was left." The deputy's eyes met his, steady and without apology, and said, "You burned what they left behind to look like him, but Clay wasn't in the building when the fire started." Max growled again, a low sound full of memory, as if he remembered something not from this life but from a life he had carried in his blood. And then the girl stepped from the shadows, hair matted, face pale, arms scraped, and said with a voice that broke like a violin string. "He's alive because they needed him, to break someone stronger." No one spoke for a long moment after that, the trees leaning in, the world pulling tight around what had just been revealed. She walked forward, the photo clutched in both hands now, and showed them what none of them were ready to see, a second man, standing beside the dog, the one they thought had died in Fallujah. "Your son didn't die in the war," she said. "He was taken, and they used Clay Darrow to do it." The old man took a step back, but the earth didn't catch him. He stumbled, heart pounding, because it wasn't rage that filled him now, it was grief sharpened into purpose. And then she said the final piece, the one that pulled every thread tight around his chest, "Your son and Clay, they're alive. But they're not free." The old man turned to the deputy, voice steady now, not calm, not numb, but forged in something older than fire. "Where are they being held?" he asked. The deputy didn't flinch, didn't look away, didn't soften his tone when he said, "In the mountains east of Livingston. Underground. Private land, no records. The place doesn't exist, unless you know what they're really guarding." The old man nodded once, slow and final, then turned to Max, and said, "You ready for one more?" The first explosion lit the ridgeline like sunrise in hell, throwing earth and stone into the air with a roar that shook the pines to their roots. Max darted forward through the blast wind, eyes locked on the concrete mouth of the underground facility, teeth bared, body moving not on instinct, but on memory sharpened into duty. The girl screamed his name, once, sharp, high, full of fear, but he didn't stop, didn't hesitate, didn't even blink as the second charge brought down the front gate in a shower of dust and rebar. The old man moved after him, rifle raised, blood ringing in his ears like an old bell that hadn't been rung in decades but still knew its own sound. They entered the smoke together, man and dog, side by side like they'd trained for this their entire lives, though neither had ever said the words aloud. Inside the bunker, red lights spun against concrete walls like blood circling a drain, alarms shrieking in short bursts between silence thick enough to feel in your teeth. The deputy covered their 6, face pale but steady, his voice tight and quick through the radio, "East Wing, 3rd Corridor, Cell Block C, that's where they're holding the asset marked Echo." The old man didn't ask how he knew that code name, didn't ask why the file matched the year his son disappeared, because answers didn't matter now, only rescue did. They turned corner after corner, boots slapping steel, Max always leading, nose to the ground, then suddenly up, ears twitching, tail stiff, body tense like he smelled something he once belonged to. And then, as they approached the final corridor, Max stopped so fast the old man nearly tripped, because the scent wasn't just familiar, it was him. The door at the end was unmarked, just cold metal in a hallway full of noise, and when the girl stepped forward with the stolen badge, the lock clicked like an old lie giving up. They opened it slowly, rifles raised, hearts hammering. Max pressed against the floor like his whole life had led him here, like this room was the thing he'd been sent to find. Inside, in the glow of a single flickering light, sat 2 figures, one hunched, wrapped in a gray blanket, the other chained to a bench, face shadowed but unmistakable. The old man dropped the rifle and stumbled forward like his legs were betraying him, tears rising without shame, voice cracking as he whispered, "Son." And the man lifted his head, older, heavier, scarred, but those eyes were his mother's and his father's, and every fight he never finished. "Dad," he said, voice dry, weak, but still whole, "they told me you were dead, they showed me your grave." The old man reached for him, hands trembling, words failing, heart breaking wide open, and said, "I thought I buried you, son, I thought I buried what was left." Max moved forward then, slowly, carefully, and rested his head against the young man's knee, whimpering low, not like a dog greeting a stranger, but like a brother coming home. The chained figure on the bench stirred then, groaned, lifted a face that had been thought lost for 3 decades, and said, "John, it's me. It's Clay." And for a long moment, the old man stood frozen, surrounded by ghosts who weren't dead, facing a past that had never truly let him go. The girl stood watch at the door, eyes scanning the hall, her voice shaking as she asked, "Can we get them out before they send reinforcements?" The deputy answered first, breath tight in his throat, staring at Clay like he was seeing a legend come alive, and said, "They won't send anyone, this whole place is about to blow." The girl turned sharply, rifle raised, face tight, and said, "You knew this was a one-way trip?" And the deputy, solemn now, no badge left on his chest, replied, "Someone had to light the fuse from the inside." The first explosion ripped through the far corridor with a force that made the walls bow inward and the lights die screaming. The girl staggered back, coughing, hand flying to her ear as the comm link in her headset fizzled with nothing but static and dread. Max barked once, sharp, loud, commanding, as if to say now or never, and the old man pulled his son to his feet with a strength born more of love than muscle. Clay leaned heavy on the deputy, coughing blood into his sleeve, eyes flickering between consciousness and memory like his mind couldn't decide which decade it wanted to stay in. Smoke was pouring from the ceiling vents, and in the distance, close, too close, something mechanical groaned like a creature waking up just to die. The old man led them through the west tunnel, one arm under his son's shoulders, one hand gripping the rifle like it was the only thing keeping them upright. Each step was slower than the last, the ground shaking now in pulses, and behind them the fire crawled closer, hungry and deliberate, like it knew the taste of what it was chasing. Then came the sound no man ever forgets, the second set of footsteps in the tunnel behind them, not running, not shouting, just following, patient as a ghost. The girl turned, raised her weapon, and whispered, "We're not alone," just as the shadow stepped into view at the end of the hall. The figure wore a suit, too clean for this place, too calm for what was happening, and in his hand was not a gun, but a phone, open and recording. "I need you to listen very carefully," the man said, his voice smooth like ice melting on bourbon, full of something that didn't fear fire or bullets. "Put down the drive. Leave the girl. Take the old man and walk out that side door, there's still time to pretend this didn't happen." The deputy raised his weapon, but the man didn't flinch, only held up the phone higher, showing the red light blinking like a heartbeat made of lies. "This entire facility has been live streaming for 10 minutes, he said, smiling faintly, "and if you shoot me, the world will watch you become the villain they've written you to be." The girl stepped forward, furious, voice trembling as she shouted, "You're Carrington's fixer. You're the one who cleaned the blood while he shook hands on television." The man nodded slowly, not proudly, but with the grim dignity of someone who'd stopped believing in redemption long ago and learned to survive on obedience instead. "I didn't kill anyone," he said, gesturing toward Clay, "but I signed the forms, I burned the files, I named the people who disappeared for the sake of stability." The old man stared at him, something cold settling behind his ribs, and asked, "So what do you want now? Forgiveness?" The man chuckled once, bitter and hollow, and replied, "No, sir. I want silence. The kind that keeps little girls from being hunted and old men from becoming martyrs." Then he pulled something from his coat, a second drive, silver, unmarked, and identical to the one the girl had been carrying since the cabin burned. "This is the real one," he said. "Yours is a decoy. We knew she'd try to smuggle it out. We let her run, so we could watch where she went." The girl stared at the drive in her hand, suddenly unsure, and asked the only question that mattered, "Then what did I risk everything to protect?" The man smiled, soft and strange, and said, "Something real enough to die for, but not real enough to win with." The old man stepped between them, rifle raised again, voice low and final, and said, "Then I guess you're staying here." But before anyone could move, Clay slumped to the ground, blood seeping fast now, and whispered, "You have to choose, him or me, you can't carry both." The ceiling gave way with a sound like the sky cracking open, and concrete dropped inches from the girl's shoulder as fire crawled across the beams. She screamed his name, Clay, but his eyes were already fading, locked somewhere between this world and another, his breath coming in shallow, broken gasps that didn't belong to a man who wanted to keep fighting. The fixer didn't move, didn't even blink, just stepped back into the shadows as if the flames knew better than to touch what he represented. Max lunged toward Clay, whimpering, then barked once, loud, desperate, a plea more than a command, and the old man turned with the weight of an entire lifetime pressing down on both shoulders. Smoke billowed now from every angle, red lights spinning slower, weaker, like the building itself had decided this chapter had gone on long enough. "You leave with your son," the fixer said, his voice oddly calm, as though the fire had given him peace, "or you leave with the evidence, but there's no time left for both." The girl's hand was trembling now, holding the flash drive like it was a cross in a burning church, her voice barely above a whisper, "If we don't show the world, none of this will ever stop." The old man knelt beside Clay, cradled his face with a gentleness usually reserved for memories or graves, and said, "I carried you out of one war. I won't leave you in another." Clay's lips moved, voice barely there, the sound of sand sliding through fingers, "She's the one who still has time. I already gave mine." And then, before the old man could protest, before the girl could speak again, Clay reached for the detonator at his belt and pressed it without fear. The explosion wasn't fire, it was wind and force and a sudden roar of everything collapsing inward like the mountain itself was exhaling its last breath. The tunnel shook so violently that the girl dropped to her knees, hands over her head, flash drive pressed to her chest like a heartbeat that wasn't her own. When she looked up, Max was already moving, dragging the old man by his jacket collar, inch by inch, teeth locked, eyes wild with the instinct of a creature who understands that love means you don't leave them behind. The fixer was gone, vanished into dust or smoke or maybe just another system waiting to reboot in a cleaner suit with fewer witnesses. They emerged from the cave mouth just before it sealed itself in thunder, rubble raining down behind them, and the sound that followed was not fire, but silence. The girl dropped the flash drive into the deputy's hand with a look that said more than words ever could, not triumph, not vengeance, just truth, raw and ready. He nodded once, opened the transmitter case strapped to his vest, and plugged it in, his fingers trembling not from fear, but from the weight of too many years pretending there was still time. 30 seconds to signal lock, he muttered, flipping switches, adjusting dials, as Max lay beside the old man, his head resting on the man's chest like he was waiting for one last heartbeat. The girl turned toward the sunrise, face streaked with soot and tears, and whispered, "When the world sees this, what do you think they'll do?" The deputy didn't answer immediately, his eyes locked on the flashing green light, and then he said, "Depends how much they still believe in heroes." The broadcast began with static, crackling, flickering, a cold, digital heartbeat, before the first frame came into focus, clear enough to stop the world in its tracks. It wasn't dramatic, not at first, just a single photograph, held by trembling hands, of a man in chains, with the emblem of the U.S. military behind him and fear barely hidden in his eyes. Then came the voice, hers, not polished or rehearsed, but raw, trembling with truth, speaking names and places and dates that should have never existed outside sealed rooms and closed coffins. "His name is Clay Darrow," she said, barely holding the camera steady, "and he was never a traitor, he was a witness they buried alive." Across the world, screens froze, phones, tablets, televisions in diners, VA clinics, and quiet living rooms, people leaning forward with the instinct that this wasn't just a story, this was the reckoning. For every photograph shown, another confession followed, documents signed in secret, operations masked as patriotism, boys turned into weapons and fathers turned into ghosts with folded flags. When the image of the sheriff appeared, standing next to generals, holding babies at parades, laughing like nothing beneath his boots had ever burned. It broke something in the heart of the country. The girl's voice cracked only once, when she said, "They told me my mother died in a car crash, but she died trying to smuggle this file." Then came the final clip, silent footage of the fire, the collapse, Max dragging Clay's body through smoke and steel while alarms screamed and the world above remained blissfully unaware. When it ended, no music played, no headlines ran, only a quiet stillness, a pause so deep it felt like the country had stopped breathing to remember how. Inside the cabin, the old man sat in silence, eyes fixed on the dark screen, rifle across his lap, a bottle unopened beside him and Max curled at his feet. The girl entered slowly, her face older now, more certain, like the world had finally met the truth and she was still here to carry its weight. "They froze his accounts," she said quietly. "Carrington. The fixer. Every one of them. Someone inside helped. We'll never know who." The deputy stepped out from the hallway, now wearing a clean shirt with no badge, only a scar where the metal used to sit, and said, "Justice moves fast, when it's embarrassed." The old man didn't speak, didn't move, just asked one question that had burned longer than any fire: did they bury the bodies this time, or just the headlines? She knelt beside him, took his hand without speaking, and together they watched the screen change, news anchors finally choking on the words, "government-sanctioned detainment of veterans." It wasn't victory, not the kind you celebrate, but it was a light in a place where there had only ever been silence. And in that moment, the old man knew, it hadn't been for vengeance, or names in history books, but for the boy who came home wearing someone else's pain. Max lifted his head, ears perked, sensing something shift, not danger, not sorrow, just the peace that comes when the fight is finally over and the truth has stopped running. Then, with a sigh heavy as winter wind, the old man said, "Now what?" The knock came just before dawn, soft but steady, like whoever stood on the porch had thought long about whether they should be there. Max was the first to rise, tail stiff, ears alert, letting out one low, questioning growl that held more memory than menace. The old man stood slowly, rifle untouched, eyes hollow from too many dreams that hadn't let go since the flames swallowed Clay and everything unspoken between them. He opened the door without a word, and for a moment, time didn't make sense, because standing there was Clay's son, no longer a boy, holding a box marked with the emblem of the Department of Defense. "I didn't know where else to go," the young man said, voice cracking like old wood. "They sent his things back, but not all of him." The old man stepped aside without speaking, gestured to the fire like it had been waiting for this very moment to warm something real again. The girl rose from the couch, eyes wide, as the young man knelt and opened the box, a dog tag, a burned notebook, and a USB drive stained with ash. He recorded it, he whispered, hands shaking as he pulled the drive free, "His last day, his choice, he wanted you to hear it first." They plugged it in together, breath held like a secret, and the screen flickered with a shaky video, Clay sitting in the bunker, eyes hollow, voice soft but sharp as a blade. "If you're watching this," he said, "it means I chose them over me, and I'd do it again, because I finally remembered who I was." He talked about the program, about Echo Sentinel and the missions they erased from memory, about the boys who came back different, and the ones who never came back at all. He said Max had saved more than one life, not just through teeth or training, but because he was the only thing they hadn't been able to program out of him, loyalty. Then Clay looked down, fingers tightening around a picture, his father, younger, laughing beside a truck, a dog in the back seat, a flag folded beside the wheel. "I kept this," he said, "because I needed to remember where the truth lived, and it was never in the orders." The screen went black a moment later, but in that room, nobody spoke. For a minute, they just let the silence carry him home. The deputy arrived a few hours later, face unshaven, eyes tired, but hands firm as he placed an envelope on the table marked, "Declassified." "They released it," he said, voice a little amazed, "full file, full story, congressional hearing in 2 weeks. They can't bury it again." The old man stared out the window, watching Max lay beside the fire, his tail moving once with a tired joy, then said, "Clay made peace with dying, so we could make peace with the truth." The girl walked to the table, took the envelope, and whispered, "It still hurts, even after the truth." And the old man nodded, voice low, steady, with years finally lifting off his chest. "That's how you know it was love." The camera pulled back on the cabin, quiet again, warm again, not victorious, but sacred in the way only places that hold pain and forgiveness together can be. The war didn't end that day, not really, because grief has long echoes, and justice moves slow, but something shifted, something unspoken healed just enough to let breath return. And there, beside the fire, the old man whispered to Max, his voice soft like it used to be, "We brought him home, boy, not whole, not easy, but home." Max blinked once, curled deeper into the rug, and let the warmth wrap around him like he finally knew, for the first time in a long time, that they wouldn't be leaving again. Outside, snow began to fall, quiet and steady, and the world, just for a while, remembered how to be still.